Okay. So we have been going through the Emacs manuals from the Emacs docs page. So we went through the different sections here, from the introduction to the distribution, organization of screen, user input, commands, and so on. We finished the basic editing commands. Let me paste this link in the chat. And today we are going to start with the Minibuffer. Okay, we're going to start with this new section today. I have uploaded the previous videos in the YouTube channel, so you should be able to check out the previous Emacs sessions here. So with that, let's get started with the Minibuffer. As again, I have started screen key, so you should see the commands that I am typing on the top panel. And I have also pushed the notes from today's session, so we can use that to start with the Minibuffer. So the Minibuffer is where Emacs reads complicated arguments. Let's start with the introduction here. So I'm opening Emacs in non-Windows system, right? So you can actually see the mode line, the echo area, everything clearly. Okay. So it reads arguments. That's the Minibuffer. Arguments such as file names, it could be buffer names, it could be Emacs commands, it could be Lisp expressions. So after we finish the Emacs manual, we'll also learn about Emacs Lisp. It is called a Minibuffer. This area here is called a Minibuffer because it's a special purpose buffer and it has very small amount of screen space. Okay. With that, let's dive into the basic usage of the Minibuffer, and then we look at Minibuffer with file names and then some editing that we can do in the Minibuffer. So when in use, the Minibuffer appears in the echo area with a cursor. It usually starts with a prompt ending with a colon, and the prompt states what kind of input is expected and how it will be used. So the prompt is generally highlighted using the Minibuffer -prompt phase. Later on, when we do customization, we'll actually see how to modify some of these variables and parameters, but for now this is something you have to keep in mind. Of course, the simplest way is to just enter text when the cursor shows up in the Minibuffer. You type the text, you hit enter, it will submit the argument and it will exit the Minibuffer. At any point, you can type Ctrl G to exit the Minibuffer. What it actually means is you're cancelling the command. This is again true in any other buffer, right? So the good thing here with Emacs is that a lot of the common commands that you've learned can be used in different buffers, right? You don't have to like memorize anything. It's just the mnemonics are very well designed for you to quickly use them. Sometimes the prompt will actually show a default argument inside parenthesis and before the colon. So if you just type enter or ret, that will be the default argument that is accepted in the Minibuffer. So for example, let's do control X B, which is to switch to a buffer. So now you see the mini buffer, it says a text switch to buffer, and there's a default option, default scratch, right? So this is the if I just hit enter, it will go to the scratch buffer, right? I hit control X B again. Now it says go to default GNU Emacs buffer. I hit enter, it goes back to the GNU Emacs buffer, right? So there is a default argument that is suggested by the prompt. Now there's something called Minibuffer electric default mode. It is a global minor mode. So in this minor mode, Emacs will hide the default argument as soon as you start to modify the contents of the mini buffer. Of course, when you return to the original mini buffer text, the prompt will actually show the default value. Now you can use the variable mini buffer ldef shorten default to true. If you do that, basically set it to true, the default argument is just displayed as default argument instead of this long string in parentheses which says default and the argument. So this is sort of trying to save some screen space. Of course, you can enable this mode using the alt-x mini buffer electric default mode. Okay, so let's try this here. So I'm going to say alt-x mini buffer electric default mode, electric. I hit tab, it just auto completes, and I hit enter. Okay, now it says mini buffer electric default mode is enabled. Now if I do control X B and I say I start typing say Emacs, so now the default string is gone, right? It just shows us E. Now if I remove the argument that I typed, it goes back to the default parenthesis value, right? That's what is actually given here in the mini buffer electric default mode settings. So it's something, if you want, you can enable it. I'm going to say control G, it will quit. And I can again, if I use alt-x mini buffer electric default mode, now it's disabled, right? So now if I do control X B and I type Emacs, I can still see the default scratch prompt in the mini buffer. Okay, so that's the electric default mode. If you like this kind of saving screen space, you can actually do that, right? If an error message or an informative message is emitted while the mini buffer is active, the message hides the mini buffer for a few seconds or until you type something, and then the mini buffer will come back. Okay, that's just for information purpose. Of course, there is the messages buffer also. So Emacs does log some useful information if you want to look at it. So when the mini buffer is in use, Emacs will not echo keystrokes. Okay, it's useful to know. And as you start using the mini buffer, you will get a idea of how it functions. Next section will be on the mini buffer for file names. So let's go through that. So we have seen that to open a file, we can use control X, control F, which is find file. So let's try that. Control X, control F. So in the mini buffer, you have a prompt here, right? It says find file colon, it's the prompt string, and then it has the path to the file that you want to open. So in this manual here they say /u2/emacs source. So find file is the colon is the prompt, and /u2/emacs/source is the default directory. So in my case the default directory is home, right? So now I can type a file here, say bash rc, and I hit enter. It will open the bash rc file for me. Now alternate defaults for the file name are available by using alt n. Now right now I don't have a Minibuffer history, so hence it doesn't complete here for me. But once you have a session going and you used open multiple files, it should show you the other values. Of course you can refer to a parent directory using the ... So all this, whatever you use in your shell environment, is completely available here. So if I do something like .ssh// I mean it's very simple example, but I mean it's the same thing, right? So if I open it, it will still work, right? So that's the parent directory. You can also do, for example, kill the entire path. Let's say I opened a directory like this. Say I mistakenly typed this one. I want to completely delete this previous directory. So you can do alt backspace, just to kill a directory. Name backwards. That's this one. Okay. Basically killing the word, same thing that we learned earlier, but now we are doing with alt. Here del is not delete keyword, right? It's backspace. Alternatively, I can do Control A, Control K, go to beginning of line and kill the line. So whatever we learned in the buffer, right, the same thing works in this mini buffer also. So to erase the entire line. Now you can also specify a alternate entire file absolute file name. For example, I can say /etc/resolve.conf. Right. Note here that this is I have just opened it as a user, so I don't have any permission to modify this, for example. So this says it's a read-only buffer. Right. / causes Emacs to ignore everything before the second slash in the pair. Okay. So the ignored part of the file name is dimmed if the terminal allows it. Now you can use alt X file name shadow mode to disable the dimming and to turn off the file name shadow mode. So let's see a quick example here. So if I do Control XF /code, I hit /, which means I ignore everything before the /, which is /code. Okay, I can do etc resolve.conf. It's still open for me. Okay. Now when opening remote file names, / causes Emacs to ignore the file name part, and it will leave the rest intact, like the method. It could be SSH, for example, username and hostname, right? So there's something called tramp mode. Later on we'll look into that. So basically you can open remote files on servers from your Emacs frame, and you can edit, modify the files. You can use tramp to SSH, have a remote session, and then you can sort of use that to work on your remote servers. So it's kind of very nice because everything is contained here, right? Emacs also has a shell built in. You can use the shell to do operations to interact with the local file system, execute commands and so on. So we look into that when you do the tramp section of the manual. But it's good to know that it's not just opening local files, but you can also open remote files. Typing 3 slashes in a row ignores everything in remote file names. So let's kill this buffer. Now slash, the tilde slash is your home directory. Okay. The tilde user ID slash also means a home directory. So I can do, this is home, I can do .bash rc, right, it will open the file, let me kill it. I can also do tilde my username .bash rc, they both mean the same. Okay. Now on MS Windows and MS DOS systems, the user doesn't always have a home directory, right? So on such systems, the user ID actually refers to the current session's user's login. To prevent Emacs from inserting the default directory, reading file names, you can change the variable insert default directory. Okay. Let's say you want to start with the default directory, that you can specify that. The Minibuffer will start out empty. The relative file name arguments are still interpreted based on the same default directory. Of course, you can enter remote file names in the Minibuffer. Let's go on to editing in the Minibuffer. Again, the Minibuffer is just like any other Emacs buffer, right? So as I said, the usual commands that you use are available for editing the argument text. The prompt, however, is read only. Like when I did Control X, Control F and says find file, I cannot change that find file string, that's read only. The argument is only thing that I can change. Okay. Now if I hit enter here, right, I am completing the argument, I am submitting it to Emacs, right. So I cannot use ret or enter to open a new line. So do you remember which command is used to open a new line? Yeah, we use couple actually. So at the prompt, if I use Control Q, and Control J, right? Control Q and Control J, that will open a new line, or Control O can also be used to open a new line. So we've seen that before. So Control Q, Control J inserts a Control J control character, which is actually equivalent to a new line. All right. Now here when I did this file completion and I hit tab or space or question mark, it basically is bound to completion commands. So it will tell you what are the possible completions. So in this quote which I have ocaml.org and emacs.org, right. Of course I can do Control A, it will move me to the beginning of the line. So the point moves to the beginning of the argument text, not to the beginning of the prompt. You cannot change the prompt, right. You can switch to another window using Control XO. So I'm now back to the GNU Emacs buffer. You can do Control XO, it comes to this completion. Control XO moves me back to the Minibuffer. So that will work. You cannot split the mini buffer window though, right? So if I add 2 or more lines of text in the mini buffer, of course it expands to accommodating the text. So I can do Control O, it expands this, right? So that is possible. So there is a variable here, resize mini windows. This controls the resizing of the mini buffer. The default value is grow only. Okay. If the value is true, the mini buffer will also shrink automatically if you remove some lines of text from the mini buffer. So it will down to a minimum of 1 screen line. The value is nil, the mini buffer window will never change the size. Okay, but you can use the usual window resizing commands. There is a variable max mini window height which controls the maximum height for resizing the mini buffer window. Now you might have seen some of the completions, whether it is not just for files, it's for commands and so on. So they will expand to a lot of options, or say Emacs mygit, for example, what are the git command options. So if you want to limit the height of the mini buffer window depending on what display you are using, you can set this variable accordingly. Now a floating point number for this variable specifies a fraction of the frames height. If you give an integer, it specifies the maximum number of lines. Nil value means you do not resize the mini buffer window automatically. The default value is 0.25. Now the Control Alt V command in the mini buffer, it scrolls the help text from commands that display help text in another window. You can also scroll the case of the help text with the Alt page up and Alt page down, but generally we don't want to use those keys, but you want to use as much of the keyboard keys as possible. This is of course useful when there is a long list of possible completions. So let's see an example here. So if I do Control X, Control F, and I do user bin, I hit tab, and I want to scroll this, right? I do Control Alt V, so it scrolls the list of files in user bin. Okay. So Emacs will normally disallow most commands that you use in the mini buffer while it is active. To allow such commands in the mini buffer, you can set the variable enable recursive mini buffers to true. Okay. You might also want to enable mini buffer depth indicate mode to show the current recursion depth in the mini buffer prompt on recursive use of the mini buffer. So when not active, the mini buffer is in mini buffer inactive mode, and you can either click mouse 1 which shows the messages buffer. If you use a dedicated frame for mini buffers, Emacs will also recognize the keys there, for example N to make a new frame. Okay. So we will stop here today, and next weekend I will resume the mini buffer session, and we will finish up the completion section, mini buffer history and passwords and so on, right? So I will upload this video in the YouTube channel. Let me paste the link to the channel in the chat. and also the GitHub link where the references for or the notes from this session are available. Let me post it in the chat. Okay. So with that we will stop here and we will finish the rest of the Minibuffer session next week. I'll stop the recording here.